When did a feeling of we need to get out of here immediately save you?
I made a somewhat late-night trip to a convenience store that I knew carried wine. I used to work really odd hours and sometimes late at night I'd finish my work and want to have a few drinks. As I was getting back in my truck, this young girl asked if I could give her a ride a few blocks back to her home. It was probably a bad idea to judge a book by its cover, but she was pretty young and dressed decently. Didn't act too weird or anything, so I figured okay. Well, I'm heading back and we get into a pretty rough part of town and she says turn left up here. Very dark street. Whatever. I stop and she says she really appreciated the ride and wanted to do something for me. Asked if she could give me a BJ. I declined and start getting sketched out. Like, she needs to get out now. She gets out and closes the door, and as I drive away, two men dressed in dark clothing were just stepping towards the street and stared at me as I drove past. Pretty sure that would have ended with a gun in my face. That's what you get for being nice sometimes.
What just seemed like a bad storm had started. My ex then decided to play with the dog out in the backyard in the rain. I got a weird feeling about how strong the winds were, and despite being called crazy, I told my ex she and the dog needed to go down into the basement for shelter with me. Within 15 minutes half my roof was gone. Apparently the storm was a derecho, which I had not even heard of before that.
Walking through the local woods in Ireland during winter, so it was dark and very cold. I see a guy in a t-shirt and shorts sitting alone in this little stone hut thing. I think it might be used for changing after swimming in the pond. Something about it really freaked me out, so I turned around and ran back to my car. I asked for a guard to go out and do a check to see if he's okay, but the man had moved somewhere into the woods. I hear a week later that a woman walking her dog had been raped the same night. Not my feeling, but whatever. It was at the Goose Fair in Nottingham in the early 2000s. I was there taking pictures for my art course, and my BF at the time fancied himself as a bit of a hardman. Liked to make out he was trained or whatever. Anyway, after about 20 minutes he made me leave. Said that shit was about to go down. Huge eye roll. Whatever dude, okay, we all leave. I see in the news the next day that a 14-year-old girl was shot dead there not long after we left.
I was riding my bike during a huge storm when I was 10. There was this huge, recently built brick/concrete wall right beside the sidewalk where I was using as a racetrack. I was having a good time and suddenly I felt that get the fuck out of here. Which I did. The next morning as I passed by the place I was playing previously, the entire wall had collapsed.
I mean, it's all speculation since we didn't actually end up getting kidnapped. But when I was 19 and traveling solo in Europe, I met this Australian girl in Spain who was also around 18, and we went to Italy together. We are both short, petite girls and were very clearly in need of a place to stay. We missed our first ferry out of Barcelona, so we had to take the next one. When we arrived in Italy, our train was hours late and we didn't get into Rome until around 1 to 2 a.m. We navigated the sketchy streets by the Termini train station and finally found our hostel. The check-in lobby was in a small dingy room that appeared to be a closet. The man working reception looked us up and down and told us there was no room for us there anymore, since we were late, but suggested we stay in their sister hostel. Desperate, we agreed. He took us downstairs back to the alleyway where we were greeted by a large man in dirty clothing. They spoke to each other in a language other than English, Italian, and led us outside. We walked down a couple alleyways until we got to an unmarked door on the side of a building. One of the men made a phone call, again speaking in a different language. We found it odd since everyone could speak English, but they chose to speak in a language we didn't understand. A man cracked the door open just enough to poke his head outside, and upon seeing the other men fully opened the door and let us in. We walked down the stairs into the sunken room, which was lit by black lights. At this point it was me, my friend, and three large men. The reception was a dirty room containing a couch with some dirty sheets laid over it. They told us the rooms were in the basement and to follow them. We walked down a set of stairs. One man in front, followed by my friend, followed by another man behind her, followed by myself and the last man behind me. We went down one flight of stairs to find that there was yet another flight of stairs going down to a closed door. At this point I lost it and my friend and I pushed past the men and scrambled back upstairs. The men kept shouting at us that the rooms were downstairs, but the scenario seemed way too wild. We eventually found an Australian couple on the street who brought us to their expensive hotel, where we booked a room. The next day we searched the internet for the sister hostel they brought us to. Can't remember the name they gave us. We found the hostel online, but it was very clear that this wasn't where they brought us. The hostel boasted beautiful views of the city, so clearly a few levels above ground, and was immaculate. We were definitely in some weird black-lit, dirty basement.
We thought for sure that we were going to get kidnapped and sold into the sex trade that night.
Not me, but my mother. She was on a business trip taking a taxi from the airport and she noticed the driver wasn't taking the route usually taken, as she had done this multiple times before. She asked him first out of curiosity. Perhaps there was a road closure or something. The guy simply mumbled something and mostly ignored her. Then it more apparent they weren't headed toward the hotel and instead away from the center of the city. She got more and aggressive, eventually demanding he stop as he kept ignoring and mumbling something. Finally she got loud enough and threatening enough that he did pull over and she got out. She had a cell phone, but smartphones weren't a thing yet. She was able to call a taxi service and get someone else to pick her up, and sure enough they were headed nowhere near her hotel. Now maybe this guy was hoping he could take an ignorant tourist on a joyride and rack up some high fare, but it sure has the feeling of something far more malicious in the making. A couple years ago, I was walking home from the bar at 1 a.m. I'm a young woman in her 20s, so this was instantly stupid. But I wanted to save money avoiding an Uber, and was also drunk, so I wasn't thinking straight. I'm walking down a main but dark street, and then a pickup truck driving by slows down next to me. Two men look at me and the passenger asks, "Hey, do you need a ride somewhere?" I lie and say no thanks because I'm expecting one in a moment. They said alright and drove off. I watched them drive down the street, and then, a ways down, I saw their brake lights light up. There was no stop sign or stoplight, so I just assumed the worst and thought, I've got to get out of here. I ran into a tiny parking lot to my right and hid behind an outdoor vending machine. Moments later, the two men pulled into the lot and circled it, clearly looking for me. When they couldn't find me, they drove away. I waited a few moments until I decided to call an Uber. I was getting a beer with a friend and he brought along his friend. When we left, I felt very drunk despite only having 2 drinks. They wanted me to come to their hotel as they were getting ready to go to a concert that night, but I made the excuse that I needed to get home because I think I left my oven on. My beer was 100% tampered with. My vision felt like I was in a tunnel. I got home in an Uber and immediately threw up and continued to do so for the rest of the night. A friend and I had just seen a midnight movie. It was about 2:30 a.m. when I pulled into a gas station to grab a Yoo-hoo. I grabbed the bottle, turned around, and saw 3 men enter the store together. One waited by the doors. One stood near the register, looking at chips. And the third was crouched down with his back to the employee door so the cashier wouldn't see him through the square window in the door. They all look at me at once and then try to ignore me, acting like they're just casually positioned around the cashier and door. I walk up, put my Yoo-hoo on the counter. The cashier turns the scanner and basically tells me with his eyes, "You do it." I ring myself up, drop money on the counter, and walk as normally as I could past the man by the door and out to my car at what seemed like the furthest pump from the store. I sit down, throw my yoo-hoo at my buddy, and hit the emergency button in my car that calls 911. I connect with dispatch and report a possible robbery. A mile or two later I see a cop car flying down the street in the direction we just came. I called non-emergency the next day to ask what happened, and they said the men fled after I left, and the cashier told the police he knew he was about to get robbed too, and to thank me for calling the police. That felt good. What didn't feel good was my buddy. In all his nervousness about what was unfolding as he was listening to me recount everything to dispatch, thought I just gave him a random yoo-hoo and chugged that thing down like a starving infant with a bottle. I was at a house party in high school and things were getting very rowdy. Tons of people just trashing the place. And I just had a bad feeling. Told my friends we should leave, but none of them would listen. I remember going out to my car, and as soon as I got in, the cops pulled up. I ducked down and waited for them to get up to the front door and just drove off without them even noticing. Several of my friends spent the night in jail or hiding in the woods that night. I slept in my comfortable bed. It would have saved a lot if my husband had listened to me. 4th of July. Fireworks. We'd had 2 fireworks misfire already. We had one left, a big mortar that you drop down a tube and then it shoots up. I had a feeling. I told my husband, I have a bad feeling about this. Let's go home. This is a bad idea. He said no. We paid $20 for this. We're shooting it off. Sure as shit. He lights it and drops it down the tube. And the tube falls over. He grabs it. It misfires. In his hand. Multiple surgeries. Months off work. He's lucky to have the hand at all, but it still doesn't work very well. The whole experience has been terrifying and horrific. I wish to hell he'd listen to me. We were hiking and geocaching up in northern Michigan, where it's pretty rednecky in spots. We were at a designated trail with a small parking lot off on some weird side road. But we decided to check it out anyway. About 5 minutes into the trail we noticed a game camera, but there was no ID on it. Game cameras on public land need to have ID info, and we thought that was really strange. We kept walking a bit, but I just didn't feel right about the camera or walking on this trail. So we turned around and went back to the truck instead of walking the last mile of the trail. When we got back to the truck, this beater pulls up with a couple in it. The guy was just a regular redneck, but the girl in his passenger seat 100% had the nods and was struggling to keep her head up. He looked surprised when we walked out of the trail, and they sat in the lot for a second and then left. Pretty sure they weren't looking to go for a hike. My guess is that was their camera, and they get the notifications when people are on the trail so they can break into their cars. It happened to us on a family trip in Kentucky years ago, so maybe I'm just a little suspicious. But we decided no more backwoods hidden nature trails for us. This was back in 2019. I was in college and there was a really cute guy in one of my classes. A week or two in, we had to work together on a small project, and I was pretty excited about the opportunity to get to know him. After speaking to him, though, I got a really bad vibe from him, but nothing specific that I could put my finger on. I lost all attraction to him and knew that I should keep my distance. He approached me a couple of times after the project, but I made sure to be pretty cool, distant, though still polite. A month or two later, same semester, our professor, Mr. Baldwin, announced that the guy had been arrested for murdering a girl he had been dating, another student in our college, and apparently it was an extremely brutal murder. He gave us the number of the detective investigating the case in case we had any info to share. This story is thanks to Mom's intuition when my brother and I were young, maybe 10 and 7 respectively. Our family was spending some time over the summer with my aunt in Central Florida. My mom had taken us for a trip to a super Walmart and we came out with a shopping cart completely full of stuff for the couple weeks we were planning to be there. My brother and I were goofing around on our walk back to the van while my mom navigated the cart. When suddenly she said, "Get to the car, now," in a tone of voice that I hadn't quite heard before, which warranted zero argument from us kids. We quickly crossed the concrete median between parking aisles. We were won over as she unlocked the van for us to get in, and we waited as she caught up a few seconds later and loaded everything herself and got in. She called our dad on her Nextel, lol, immediately as she peeled out and told him that she noticed a particular car with two men in it passed by us when we were initially walking toward into the store, which for some reason gave her very bad vibes. And sure enough, they had waited and began following us down the lot as we exited the store with a giant cart full of stuff and headed to our vehicle. My dad then called the police in the store to let them know. Lo and behold, some days later, two guys with that same car had been arrested for attempted mugging at that exact Walmart after multiple calls to police had been made. Only as an adult did I realize the adrenaline rush my mother had to have experienced in order to physically pick up that shopping cart outright to bring it across the median as quickly as she did, instead of having us walk to the next cart opening in the median or walk all the way to the end of the aisle and come back up with those guys following in their car. Who's to say what would have happened? It was plain daylight and quite busy in the parking lot. But one thing is for sure, mothers don't mess around when their intuition kicks in. Me and some friends were in downtown Vancouver watching Game 7, Stanley Cup Finals, at a pub. Vancouver lost and things on the street got a bit rowdy. My friend wanted to stay and wait for things to come down, but I just had a bad feeling and said, "We should hop on the next bus to Kitsilano." On the way over the bridge, I looked back and saw trails of smoke from burning cars coming from the city. A huge riot ensued and it was absolute anarchy all night. They shut down transit shortly after we arrived home. This is one of those strange events, and I just put it down to pure luck more than anything else. A few of my friends were leaving a house party one night. This was ages ago, when I was in my early 20s, and we were all on the road just having fun. Some of us were inebriated, and some of us were just high on life. I suddenly got an urge to get off the middle of the road. This is a narrowish one-lane side road. For apparently no reason. I am about 220 pounds at 5 feet 8 inches. Physically pushed three girls off the road with my arms spread and got to the grass bank on the side of the road. The girls were just about to start complaining about me manhandling them when an idiot teenage driver sped past us in a decked-out cheap sports car. We would all have been mowed down if I didn't push everyone off the road. I wish this story ended there. Not even 5 minutes after he went past us, the driver of that car had swerved to avoid a stray dog on the road and had crashed at around 80 miles per hour into a stone wall. He was apparently 15. The minimum driving age in my country is 18, and was the son of a millionaire. Up in the woods, about 2 a.m., having a very large bonfire in midwinter. There were probably 7 or 8 feet of snow where it wasn't packed, and my friend and I were the only two sober. After about 45 minutes we both looked at each other at the same time and went, "Something is wrong." Neither of us could quite explain it because we hadn't seen anything. But we knew there were animals in the woods. Grizzlies, wolves, and bobcats are all known to be there, but generally leave larger groups in fires alone. We managed to convince the roughly 15 drunk guys to head back to the trucks a mile away. As a group, knowing at least the sober friend had a gun on her and could use it. We got everyone into vehicles and everyone shipped back to town eventually. when the guys who did believe us went back out in the morning to check that everything was cleaned up, and found the tracks of a pack of wolves that had been circling the clearing. Decided to have a look at a covered stream that I hadn't been down before. We weren't expecting it to be much, so no safety call out, weather check, or even bother to let anyone know where the entrance is. Get about 750 meters in, and my buddy notices a load of water pouring in up ahead. We look at each other and go, we need to get out now. In under 5 minutes, the water went from ankle-deep and manageable to knee-deep and almost pushing us over. We reached a section with some steps, a ladder, and a handrail for inspection, and managed to push the lid off with the water getting deeper every minute. If that ladder had been 10 meters further, we might not have made it. If we'd have slipped, dead. When we got out, it was raining gently. We were soaking wet, and just looked at each other with that "oh fuck" look. A bit more above ground exploring, and we worked out that the culvert went under a local canal. If we'd have slipped, we'd have ended up in a sump under a canal, and likely never made it out. Nobody knew where we were, what was happening, or how to find us. In all likelihood, the only time they'd know where we died is when our corpses got spat out into the nearby river. A combination of stupidity and stupid good luck, I guess. Was on my first solo road trip to the US when I was around 34. Male, straight, stayed in a fairly remote Texan campsite and decided to go for a little trek. End up hitting a parking bay. It's about 4:50 p.m. Nobody else around. Then some guy in his mid-40s rolls up in a van. Starts talking. All seemed normal enough until he asks if I want to go for a ride and a smoke with him. Politely declined. Then he said the bug went down my top. Without realizing I lifted it, and he then commented on having nice chest hair. Said I need to get back to my group and started walking in the opposite direction. Dude then starts reversing and getting a bit aggressive and insisting we go for a ride. I just got straight back to the trail and started running. No idea if he was just some strange friendly guy, a potential thief, rapist, serial killer, or if I accidentally stumbled into a meet-up place for gay men. Glad I didn't stick around to find out anyway.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Haircast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.